Hello, everyone who is joining us on this wonderful Friday afternoon. Welcome to the Working in Theater series. Today's topic is marketing your work. I'm so excited. I'm joined today by two professionals in the industry, and we're going to talk about not just marketing, but also public relations. And we're going to discuss the difference between the two and how you both areas help promote your. I think I okay. So today by Sequoia Houston, who is an entrepreneur and a marketing expert. I'm also joined today by Lucy Pollock, who is a PR, a public relations expert. So thank you so much for coming today. Sorry for the technical issues. Everyone who's watching live and on the replay, I have a weak internet connection today. Y'all know how it is, no big deal. So I'm gonna give first of all, I'd like to say just a reminder that we do have closed captioning available. So if you need to access that, the link for that is in the chat. And we would like to say thank you to the California Arts Council and the National Arts and Disability Center at UCLA for making the closed captioning available to us. And yeah, if I could just have you all give yourselves a quick introduction. We'll start with Sequoia. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Sequoia Houston. I'm an actress first, but I also do other things, including running a marketing agency called the Surreal Group. So I know all about the fun intersections of trying to market your work and how interesting that could be. So looking forward to talking to you and answering questions.
Thank you, Lucy.
Hi, I'm Lucy Pollock, and I am a publicist. I specialize in the performing arts, so I do mostly theater, probably 95% theater, but I also work with music and dance. And I've been doing it for several decades now. I started out as a theater producer, and I'm thrilled to be here today.
Wonderful. And so just for all of you watching, I'm coming at you live from the ancestral lands of the Tongva people. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your name, tell us where you're joining us from, and tell us a little bit about yourselves. I see a lot of familiar names in the chat already. Welcome. So today I want to kind of start off by discussing the difference between marketing and public relations. It's a conversation that it's a question that a lot of people have. And since you two are experts in both, I just kind of want to maybe start with the difference between the two, and then we can talk about how one area may handle a situation and how another area may handle a situation. So Lucy, how would you describe your job as a public relations expert, a publicist, right?
Right. So the basic difference that I see between marketing and PR is that I have no budget. There's no money for PR. So it's my job to get free publicity. And the big difference is there that I have to work really hard to craft my message and hope that the message is picked up by newspapers, broadcast media, online sites, exactly the way that it's crafted. But once it's out of my hands, if I schedule an interview or something, I really have no control over it after it leaves. Whereas with marketing, there's a budget involved. You can buy an ad, you can spell out exactly what you wanted to say, and you have total control over it. So the basic difference is that, most people understand that an ad is paid for. And but if you get a story in a newspaper or online, or if you get a television interview, then it lends more credibility to the project because it's not controlled by the owner, the performer, or the theater or whatever. But as a PR person, I work very closely with marketing because it's no good to have those free those free placements if they're not amplified. And that's the job of marketing. So when I get a free story, then it is Sequoia's job to make sure to blast that out there and make sure that everybody knows about it, to put quotes in the ads, or to send links out via social media or anything like that. So basically, I see paid advertising increases name recognition, and publicity increases credibility.
I love that. First of all, I love it. Information that is short and snappy and easy to remember. So paid advertise. Say it again for me one more time.
Paid advertising it increases your name recognition. It's branding. Everybody knows the word branding. And publicity is credibility.
Wonderful. And Sequoia, how would you describe your job as a marketer, as a marketing professional?
I think Lucy nailed it on the head. She creates the story. She creates the what we're going to talk about in the messaging for the overall brand. But then it's our job as marketers to then go amplify that story, to run with it, to share it across different mediums, and to find different and unique and interesting ways to share it, whether that be via our social channel, social media, via email marketing, or creating partnerships with different organizations that we can then leverage some of their relationships to share the messaging as well.
Wonderful. Okay, so let me just reframe my thought, because as you and everybody watching knows, I'm starting an arts organization. I'm not saying that I often ask questions that can help me in my own personal growth as a new founder, but this is where we are. So I don't have a budget for marketing, and I was wondering where to start. But if what you're saying is that PR requires no budget, is maybe that where I should start?
Can I make a point on that? And I think Lucy would agree with this. So I think the difference between PR having no budget means that you can't go to the LA Times and say, hey, I want to pay to put this article in your paper. There's no payment that you can use to get PR. They either want to run the article or they don't, right? Mm-hmm. So you can also have no budget marketing, which is definitely tricky. But I think that's a difference. No budget marketing just means that you can do things and be creative with it. But with PR, you don't have a budget because the nature of PR is that you don't pay for that credit. You're trying to build credibility, so you don't pay for that.
I see. So if I wanted to build credibility for my new organization, what are some steps that I may want to take?
Well, the first thing you need to do is to craft the story. And that usually starts with a press release. And I think that the key to writing a good press release is to write it as if it is a story. It needs to be a news story. And you also have to have something that the media wants. So it's not all about, I know I hear a lot that, the media owes us something. The media should be covering us because they should be covering the arts. And or the media owes us something because they should be covering restaurants that are struggling during this time, or small businesses, or anything. The reality is that the media doesn't owe anybody anything. It's their job to sell their product. It's their job to increase viewership if they're television. They're interested in ratings. It's their job to sell newspapers or to sell clicks or whatever it is they're selling. So the first thing you have to do is craft something that they want. And you have to think about it that way, that you are giving them something for their readers, their viewers, their constituency.
That's an interesting point. So, I mean, the thing that you're crafting, is it consistent across the board, or do you slightly change it up depending on the media outlet that you're approaching? Like, do you consider the readership of the LA Times and you consider the viewers of the news and you consider them to all be the same, or do you slightly change it up in order to?
Oh, no, you have to target your media. What you don't want to do is, there are two ways to approach sending a press release out. There's what they call just like a scatter shot. You just send it everywhere and hope it lands. But then you end up spamming people. You want to be very targeted and craft sometimes a different story for a different outlet, not even just the different like broadcast or or print, but for a different area, a different, it depends on what the outlet is focusing on. So let's say that I'm working on a play, and the play is about serious social issues, but it also features some celebrities. Obviously, the TV people are going to be interested in your celebrities. They don't care about this. Well, it depends, but the entertainment shows are usually more interested in celebrities. Whereas a newspaper or a socially minded online site might be more interested in the social issues. So you have to decide sort of how to frame it. It doesn't mean that you don't include everything. It's just sort of the way you write your story and the way you craft your story. And you should craft it in a way that it reads like a press release is a news release. That's another term for it. So you want to craft it in a way that it reads like a news story, and that technically an outlet could technically sort of pick it up and plop it in, and it wouldn't look out of place. Which means it also needs to be well written. You need to learn journalistic style, be it AP style or whatever. Yeah.
And make sure that it truly is newsworthy. Like we can't stress that enough, because some people will be like, well, I launched a website. And it's like, okay, that's great. We're happy for you. But do you news outlet is really going to say to their audience, hey, Lindsay or LJ launched her website, So.
Right. It has to be something that they want, that they consider newsworthy. So yeah. And there may be different sites. I mean, if you're a theater company and you announce a new play, some sites might not be interested, but maybe there's a theater site that would be interested, because that's what they write about. So you have to target who you're sending to.
Completely.
I really feel like that's really valuable advice. I mean, because if you can write up a press release, but you have to be thoughtful about who you send it to and what's in it. Yeah, I love that. And this is actually a great time for me to mention that Lucy has sent us several sample documents, including press releases. They're available on the series Padlet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to Lucy and Sequoia and ask them a few more questions. And then as we do every week, I want to hear your questions as well. So make sure that you put your questions about marketing and public relations in the chat. And then if we have time at the end of the session, we're going to go through some of those sample documents, and Lucy's going to give us a little bit more information on them. So start thinking about your questions now so that I can make sure I ask our experts today. And then we'll also make sure that you visit the series Padlet so that you can see there's all kinds of gold in there. Sample press release, sample event announcements, all kinds of things that I'll be copying and pasting as we go on. So coming back to the idea of a budget, right? So let's say you're starting out and you're one step above no budget to small budget. What are some of the critical things that, in your opinion, a small budget should go towards? Like, if you only have so much money, what should you spend it on?
That's an interesting question. I think one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that if you don't have a budget, then you also have to use sweat equity, right? And so using sweat equity kind of boosts your budget a little bit. So what I would do then would be to focus on what kinds of things can I put out on social media, for example. And I might not have a huge budget to do ads and to boost posts and things like that. But what are some ways that I can work with other people to amplify my message? How can I partner with other people that might also have large audiences and things like that to get the word out about what I'm doing? So I have a friend, for example, who during the pandemic started a chat weekly on IG Live, where she talks to different people. And it's been great for her because other people are watching her, people who may not have normally watched her. She has a lot of well-known she's an actress and has a lot of her actor friends who are also well-known in varying levels. And so she's getting more eyes on her as an actress and the things that she does and on her page, just by the nature of building those relationships. So I think finding those areas that you can kind of leverage to get in front of more eyeballs, and just being creative in those ways. A lot of people now are doing podcasts with a minimal budget. Sometimes, depending on how you do it, they can be minimal budget. But just really putting in that sweat equity to do some of those things that are going to give you a larger reach and give people a reason to pay attention to you in a way that would be beneficial to you.
Yeah, and I should add that when you say no budget, I mean, the reality is that hiring a marketing person or a PR person should be in the budget. If you have very little budget, I would say put it to trying to hire one or the other or both and let them use their expertise.
Very true.
Instead of trying to do everything yourself, because that's a big problem when a business owner tries to do everything, produce the event and do the PR and do the marketing, and it just is, you get diminishing returns.
Yes, excellent point. I know I just filled out a grant application and I did request a marketing person. It was like the number one thing on my line item, because as we discussed over and over and over again throughout this series, when you're making a budget, personnel is always the most expensive item on the budget. Paying people at the end of the day, if you're doing it right, is going to be your biggest expense. And so my line of thinking was, if I get a marketing person in here, I have to pay that person, but they're going to bring more people into my community so that I can further fund my projects. So it's an investment of a sort.
Exactly. And it's the same thing with PR. Like, I always consider, if I get a big story placed, think of what just like one display ad would have cost, or one online ad, and one ad gets you nowhere. But so I figured that you're paid back, and everything after that is free.
And if you look at time as a representation of money as well,
right,
and you think about the time it would take you to do something, so it might take you as the owner, 5 hours to come up with a flyer for your event, but it might take a designer 30 minutes, an hour to do it, and that saves you in the long run. And those are hours that you can spend doing something else.
Right.
Yes, and we all know, everyone watching knows that it's critical to be able to calculate your hourly rate, right? So if you decide that learning how to be a marketing personnel is going to take you 20 hours, calculate how much of your time that is, and then see if it might be cheaper to hire somebody. Is how I feel. Can I ask y'all a question about ads? Because you mentioned ads, and we all know there's, social media ads, digital ads. Are ads still a valuable place to put your marketing budget? And if so, where do you feel are the most valuable places to use that advertising budget?
I think that really depends on what your budget is, right? So if I were starting out again and I had a smaller budget, with a smaller budget, and I say under $500 for the month or for the project, whatever, I would start with Facebook ads, because a lot of people are on Facebook and you can target very specifically on Facebook. So I would go there. If I had a little bit more money, so say I had $1,500, I would then go and do some Google ads and do some display ads and some retargeting things. And obviously this is going to differ based on what it is you're promoting, but just as a general rule of thumb, that's what I would do. If I wanted to then, say for example, now I'm looking to promote a short film that I did and I want to reach casting directors specifically. At that point, I might look and say, okay, do some research on LinkedIn. Are there people on LinkedIn that are listing themselves as casting directors? What can I do to reach them? And I might decide that I'm going to do a very specific targeted in-mail campaign. So I think you look at what it is that you're trying to do, understanding what you want to do. But, if you're looking at having a broader audience, starting those broader channels like the Facebook and the Google AdWords. But if you're wanting to spend more on a more specific thing that's going to get you what you think might be a better return based on what you're trying to do, then something like LinkedIn.
Lucy, do you have anything to add?
Well, I just think that they keep changing. I think there's so much noise out there right now. Everybody is so inundated with everything. When I first started out, they used to say it took 5 impressions to sell a ticket. You had to, read something and see an ad and hear it on the end. And then it was 7, and then it became 9, and now I think it's up to 30 or something crazy.
33.
33. Okay. Yeah. So 33 impressions to sell a ticket. So I think an important thing to do is to look at and again, I'm not a marketing person. I only sometimes advise, but I would look at the cost of the ad and at what the possible return might be. And, I think there are so many Facebook and Google and email campaigning and social media that you can do right now, that I think that unless you can afford to really spend money on advertising, I would stay away from a lot of I know it's tempting to want to run a display ad in the LA Times or to want to advertise on NPR. They don't call it advertising, they call it underwriting. It's still quite expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you really need to consider to balance whether it's worth it.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I think now let's do some questions from the chat. Just a reminder to people watching, feel free to drop your questions about marketing and PR so that we can get our experts' opinions. First up, we have a question about, if you do a lot of things, how broad or narrow should your brand be? What belongs and doesn't belong in the brand? I really love this question because many of us theater practitioners are slashers, right? Like actor / writer / producer. Sequoia, I know that that's your experience as an actor and also an entrepreneur. So how do you decide how to brand yourself, how to market yourself when you have a lot of things to talk about?
Yeah, I think I have 2 answers to this question. One, there is no real right or wrong answer because people do it differently. There are things that you can do better, right, than others. But there is a school of thought that I could represent myself as Sequoia, who is all of these things, and I can have my website as my hub that talks about all of these varying things that I do. And people who are fans of mine will want to go and learn more about the things that I do. And that's not a wrong way to do things. There's also a school of thought that I might want to have these things separate, or the things that aren't as closely connected, have them separate. So for example, I went the route of separating everything. So I have my website and all that stuff that focuses on my acting, but I keep that separate. And then I have my business stuff, and I don't really even put my name on my business stuff a lot of times because I really focus on the fact that when people think of Sequoia Houston, I want them to think of the actress. And it does get murky. But if I wanted to create Sequoia Houston as the overall brand and have everything under there, that's not a bad way to go either. I just have to know that people are going to start to see me in different ways, and they might not. One of the things I think earlier on in my career that's changed over time, and I'm seeing it change more and more, is that people wanted you to be a specialist. They wanted to know that you act, and they didn't want to know that you did anything else, because if you did anything else, it made it seem like you weren't as serious about acting. That's changing a lot. And even what I've seen over the last year with people having to pivot, it's changing even more. And people are starting to understand that folks can do all of these different things as well. So it's not as big of a problem, I don't think, to combine those things and build your brand and build you as the brand and everything that you do under the one brand as it was in the past. But I think that would be a great question for Lucy too, though, because she she might have a completely different answer.
Well, it's interesting because I have two ways of branding. I mean, I brand myself as a publicist, obviously, because I want to be able to offer my services, but I try not to combine myself with my clients. So, I mean, I know, for example, that probably most publicists send out press releases on their own letterhead. I almost never do that. The only time I do that is if I'm working for a very small client who doesn't have their own branding, their own logo. I always send my press releases out on the letterhead of the company because I want to focus on their brand And I make sure that when I'm sending out an email, that even though it's coming from me, and most journalists know me, and hopefully they will open my emails, that it is the company that is in the subject line, that it's very clear who I'm writing about. And so I really, and it's interesting because we talk about social media. I don't do social media, as I said. And one of the reasons I don't is because I don't want to mix up my clients. Like, I always think, if I have a Facebook page, I don't want to, I don't show favorites between my children. I really try not to. I love all my children. And I don't want to be posting about one company and then not posting about another. So I leave it to that company to amplify what I've done for them and to send it out on their social media. I don't want to be pushing one over the other. So I try to keep my name separate, and my I don't use my Facebook for those purposes and whatnot.
Wonderful. So speaking of social media, now seems like a great time to mention that Sequoia has actually given us a social media toolkit. It's accessible in the Padlet. And if you use the code Maroon, then you get free access through the end of the year. So I am tragically terrible at social media marketing. I'm at a critical juncture where LJ's personal life is now kind of being being mixed in with the Maroon Arts and Culture social media presence. And people who I'm meeting in my professional life as a freelance dramaturg are now like, oh, we're going to try to follow you on social media. And then that gets a little weird for me. So I need social media help. So Sequoia, can you give us some advice on social media marketing, and or maybe talk to us about some of the tools and the toolkit that you sent us so we know how to use them?
Absolutely. So I think it kind of goes along with the conversation that we were just having. Whichever way you decide to go, whether you decide to brand yourself as LJ, as your brand, and all things under your brand are connected to you, or if you decide to make your brand very separate from you, you want to make sure that you're very consistent in that and you're strategic in the way that you put out your messaging as a result of the decision that you make. So you don't want to have a situation where it becomes jarring, right? If you, for example, with Mocha Stock, I share some things about it, but I don't really put a lot of my Mocha Stock on my personal social media because I'm opinionated. I talk about politics. I talk about all kinds of things that I don't necessarily want associated with my brand. I don't want people to think any kind of way about that brand because they thought I was associated and being snippy about something like that, right? So I tend to keep that completely separate for the most part. And doing that very strategically. So I have all different social media channels for that. It has its own, own unique, each channel is at mochastock.com. Again, you want to be very specific. You want to be very strategic. You want to be very consistent. So at such and such and such, making sure it's consistent across channels, I think is very important so that people know how to reach you. And just making sure that you remember that social media is social. It's about building those relationships. It's about letting people understand who you are as a brand or as a person or as an artist. But it's also about building the relationships and getting to know who they are and paying attention to what they're doing and commenting on their posts and things like that. There's a reciprocity, I think, that sometimes gets lost. And those who really handle that reciprocity well, I think really do well at social media. As a part of building those relationships on social media and getting to know people, there are opportunities that can come from that. So I've had two offhand that I can think of that were completely based on social. So on Twitter one day, someone that I followed posted something about looking for a script supervisor. I reached out. applied or reached out, had a conversation with them, and wound up getting the job. It was my first time doing script supervising, but I was able to do it because I'd started building those relationships. And that came from me not only paying attention to what I do on social and posting things about me, but paying attention to what other people were doing and connecting with them. Also, if you get to the point, like we mentioned before, about having a limited income and looking at how to put in some of that sweat equity and build some of that stuff up that you want people to do, building more content, looking at all that, you can start creating and posting things on your own social channels. So I recently posted myself doing monologues, and some of that was because I was bored, right? But it was a way for me to have content that I put on there, things that I could regularly post. And I wound up getting some acting jobs from that. I did 2 films in the last couple months just based on the fact that I put something on social media. So, and now I've worked with those people who saw me, I regularly comment on their stuff. I regularly like their posts. I regularly keep in touch because I want them to remember me when they're doing new projects. So again, remember that it's social, use it to your benefit. Don't just post about yourself, but use it to build those relationships.
What are some of the things that you have in the social media tool that when you were telling me about it before we came on, I was like, I don't even know what that is.
So it's a social media, it's called Surreal Social. And it's a scheduling tool. So you can schedule your posts in advance, or you can send it out like on the fly as well. But it's great for scheduling things in advance. It's great for looking at the analytics of the things that you post after the fact as well. You can do things like set up sweepstakes and contests. So if you wanted to have a really quick contest that you do for your followers to encourage them to love you and be a loyal fan, you could definitely do that kind of stuff through that platform. And it makes it really easy for you to do that and for you to manage it. You can also sell your tool. Like, say, for example, you decided you wanted to get some merch. You want to get a hat and some shirts and other swag that has your name or your brand on it. You can do that and sell that directly through Facebook, and that tool helps facilitate it.
Wonderful. I cannot wait to explore and look around. All right. So just a reminder to everyone watching, if you have any questions for our experts, please feel free to share them in the chat and we will make sure we will ask them. Chris wants to know, what are your thoughts on any publicity or bad publicity is good publicity? Is that the truth?
Yes, I'm muted. Okay. Well, there's some truth to that. I don't know about any bad publicity. I mean, there is some bad publicity you just do not want to have. But for the most part, yes, anytime your name gets mentioned, I think that raises awareness, especially in a society where there is so much noise and it takes 33 mentions to even get remembered. So, yeah. You don't want bad negative publicity about your brand per se, but for example, a negative review is still a review, and it still means that your project was taken seriously, that it was considered, and there's usually something positive in there, and it's still, if people read it, it's still better than no review. So I think it sort of depends on what it is.
Yeah, I struggle with that because I'm like an introvert extrovert, and so I would rather not tell anybody than tell people and then they hate it.
What's funny is that there's always a way to spin it too, right?
Yes.
So say, for example, you had a bad review and it was tragic, right? Maybe your brand is a type that is a fun brand, and you make fun of that and make fun of yourself and use that as an opportunity that can then ingratiate people to you, right?
Yeah,
And maybe
I mean,
there are ways
yeah.
to make it work for you, even if it's bad.
How many super bad movies have become cult hits? I mean, just because a critic thinks something is bad, I mean, there are some projects that are review proof to begin with. People just love them, no matter what some reviewer might say. But that review still, the whole thing and the whole controversy of that can bring your profile up. So.
We talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but can you give us, like, what are your thoughts on if you do get bad publicity? I mean, yeah, you can maybe spin it, but like, what if it's something really, really bad? Like, how do you handle, what does crisis management look like in terms of public relations? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, we were talking about this before the session started. I don't think of I didn't never thought when I went into performing arts publicity that I would have to deal with crisis management, but I have had to deal with it on a couple of occasions. And I think we all agreed that it's best really not to engage. Let it go away. Don't fan the fires. You don't want to start arguing with, you can't win if you start arguing it. If you get asked, you can produce, and if it's deserved, you should own it if asked, I would think. And if it's undeserved, which was true in the case that I'm thinking of, I mean, it was really undeserved. The best thing to do is just not to engage, and maybe, if you have some evidence to prove that the person was wrong, to have that handy if asked.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that public sentiment is super short. We're always moving on to the next
Right.
thing. So by the time you even get ready to craft your response, people are usually already moved on, and you crafting your response and trying to manage it will often be the thing that keeps it in the news versus you just allowing it to
Yeah,
go.
just let it go away.
I love that. And I especially love the tip about, like, if it's deserved, then you own it, because we kind of are in a place right now where people can no longer get away with pretending that they're not,
Right.
that they didn't do something. It's especially in social media world, stuff lives on the internet forever. And if you make somebody mad enough, they will dig through your life and they will find the evidence that they need to support their claim. So yeah, if you deserve the bad publicity, you own it. If it's not deserved, then you just do not engage. That would be a
Exactly.
struggle for me. But again, that's why you invest in people to do this kind of thing for you. Because I would definitely need somebody being like, okay, LJ, we've decided not to engage. Go ahead, keep your mouth shut. We had a question here about what is the difference between, like, how would PR and marketing look different for an individual compared to a larger group or business project? So a lot of our participants are individual artists. And like many of us, they've decided that they're going to promote their own work, produce their own work in order to get a foothold in the industry, which I support 100%. So how might their strategies be a little bit different than somebody who is working on behalf of an organization?
I don't think they are different. I think it's the same. If you want to get publicity as an individual, you need to find a newsworthy angle for what you're doing. And if you want to do marketing, you need to amplify your message. I think it's pretty much, I don't think it's any different. I don't think it's any different between fields either. I've gotten asked to do publicity for, I specialize in performing arts, and occasionally somebody will come to me and ask me to do PR for something that I don't specialize in. I mean, I recently got asked to send out a press release for a group of psychotherapists who were doing COVID relief support groups, that kind of thing. And I've done a few, like I said, a few other kinds of things. And it's really not, the only difference is your target. You need to you have a new target list. You're going after different people, but it's basically the same job.
I think technical aspects of the job are absolutely the same. I completely agree there. I do think that there are some things, if I had an individual client versus a business client, that I might do differently. But that really, and some of that is purely based on budget, right? Because individuals sometimes have a smaller budget. Some of it may be based on sentiment, right? A lot of times corporations or organizations are they're less likely to stand up for certain beliefs, whereas an individual has an opportunity to be more themselves. And so I think that's an important thing to remember. And so I think finding those opportunities for someone to become an influencer and to influence the things that they do, and maybe use what they're working on. So use the projects that they're working on to amplify some of the other things that they're doing. I think there are some opportunities that you can do that a little bit easier than in corporate. But at the end of the day, at the root of it is the same. It's just how you're able to be a little bit more creative in certain aspects.
Wonderful.
I think the key, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was going to say, though, I think what Sequoia said, she used an important word, which is creative. You have to be creative when you're doing PR or marketing. I mean, that's really the key to it, is get creative and really think about what your message is and what you're trying to get out there, and come up with some creative angles and some creative targets. Don't just always go back to the same old, same old. So, yeah.
And I think as individuals, you have to keep in mind that you are still a brand and understanding what your brand represents. And I think that's another thing. It's kind of the other side of the coin that I just mentioned. With a lot of organizations, they know what their brand represents. They know what they're selling, right? And they stay in their lane. As an individual, you have to know what your brand is. You have to know what you're selling. Yes, I'm an actress, but what does that mean? What does that look like? How does that make me different from any other actresses out there? And I think once we start kind of getting into that, I think that's where you can start being more creative. And that's where you can start showing your personal interest in yourself as an influencer and the things that are important to you.
Can I ask you all a question? So when you get a client for the first time, what are some things that you ask them so that you can better understand their brand and the message that they're trying to send out?
Well, I usually start with just sort of a phone chat. We just talk and I make notes, and it's amazing what comes out. We just literally just talk. I ask them questions, and that leads to different questions, and you just kind of get to know the person and get to understand what it's not just a matter, I do know, again, I mean, you can take materials that people give you. People can send you a blurb and a bio and a headshot, and you can put all that into a press release and send it out. But I think what you want to do is make that an interesting story. So you have to dig and find out what the story is.
Yeah. I think I completely agree with her. And I think that when you have those conversations, things come up, and and even just in the way that something said, you might think of a way to creatively, share a story or amplify a message that you might not have thought of if you just handed them a form or just asked them standard questions.
Exactly.
So it's a very collaborative process, and I think that comes from having those, very open and conversations, kind of like if you're meeting a new friend, you know what I mean? Get to know them.
Yes, exactly. And communication is one of the most important tools that either of us can use. I mean, I communicate constantly with my clients. I'm always, and actually one of the great things for me about the pandemic, one of the positive aspects about it is that, because I freelance and I work for a lot of different companies, I don't have time to be driving all over the city for staff meetings every day. I would never get any work done. But now everything's on Zoom. So I can be at every staff meeting. I can get to know, I'm so much more in touch with everyone. And it's actually been a very positive side effect for me.
Going back to the beginning of this series, our very first session was on developing your artistic point of view and understanding your artistic perspective. So I think for a lot of emerging artists and people who are promoting their own work as individuals and maybe not as an organization, when it comes time to craft your story, to make that press release, to identify your brand and solidify your brand, maybe go back to that conversation we had in week 1 about who it is who you are, the story that you're trying to tell, and what drives you to tell that story, why this story, and why are you the person to tell it. And I think that if you start there, from what I'm getting from Lucy and Sequoia, I feel that if you start there, that will lay a strong foundation for you to really kind of promote yourself and your brand. I have a question that's, unless you all have something to add to that.
Well, I was going to just add about, writing a press release, there are some sort of, tried and true ways to do it. And one thing they always talk about is the inverted pyramid, about, getting all the information in at the top and then working your way down. I think a really important thing to remember is that, again, there's so much noise. People don't have the time or the inclination to read a lot. So you have to be really careful to get everything important in at the beginning. And that starts with your subject line in your email. Think about the subject line. It's not just a subject line. You really need to think about what it is so that people open the email to begin with. Then think about what your headline is. And think about, make sure it's not too long and too complicated. You want to keep it really focused. You want people to keep reading. And when you write your press release, you need to think to yourself, okay, what if the person stops reading here? What have they learned? What if they stop reading here? What if they stop after the first paragraph and don't get any farther? What have I given them? What if they read to the second paragraph? So you really want to think about, because they're not going to, chances are that 75 to 80% of the people, if that much, are not going to read the whole thing.
I don't want to interrupt you, Lucy, but I do want to throw up the example press release that you sent us since we're talking about it.
Sure. So I had sent over two samples. One was for a regular on-stage event, and the other is, I modified it slightly, obviously, now that everything is virtual and there's no place, there's no location anymore. But I think, first of all, what's key about this press release is that it's written in, it's a PDF. I would never send it out this way, just to be clear. This is a PDF that you can view. It doesn't look anything like this when it goes out to the press. First of all, it always goes out in the body of the email. Never send an attachment, because I mean, you can't get people to read to begin with. To get them to open an attachment is another story, and then you also risk getting caught in spam filters, obviously, if you're sending attachments. So it all goes out in the body of the email, and it's more evenly spaced, and there's always a graphic image with it. You always want to have something visual to accompany it. So I just want to make that clear. So this looks like a 3-page release, but it's really not, because it's the body of the email. And you think about, if you get a constant contact email, it's going to look like that. So I can't, I have to look at my own. That's too small for me. I can't read this.
Sorry, you know,
the screen.
But everybody has access to the Padlet. So if you want to go look at it, you can. But yeah, can you just take us through some of these elements that you were mentioning before?
So the first thing is the headline. So again, there are different journalistic styles. I follow AP style with all my releases, which is what the LA Times uses. So that's sort of, and the New York Times as well. So a couple of key things. There are two ways that you can write a headline in journalistic style. One is, some people will cap every word in the headline. I write it as a sentence. If you notice, the only things that are capped are things that would normally be capped in a sentence. I don't cap other words, which is how, if you go to an LA Times article, you'll see that's how they write their headlines. And there are no articles in a headline. There's no there's no. So think about writing a news story. Read some news stories. Go to the New York Times, go to the LA Times, go to the Chicago Times, and read a few the Chicago Tribune, and read a few headlines and see what they look like, because that will help the journalist. If they want to craft a story, it just makes their lives easier, and it also makes it easier for them to read. So then all the key information is in the first paragraph. The who, what, where, when. What is it? When is it? And how do you access it is all in the first paragraph, always. But I try to be creative about what that first paragraph looks like. So it's not just, oh, okay, the Rogue Artist Ensemble is presenting a show. I try to come up with a creative sentence to intro it, so that there's something that makes people want to read on. And then I list all the facts. So every first paragraph looks basically the same, but they're all different because I try to be creative with them. Then the second paragraph is a little bit more detail, what it's about. Then I usually have some kind of, what's important is too, that because it's a news release, everything in a press release should be factual. Technically, if you really want to be technical about it, you shouldn't use any adjectives in a press release, because those are all subjective. That is impossible for artists. You can't write that way. You've got to use some adjectives. But you really can't put anything that can't be fact checked into a press release. So you can't say blah 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 is the best actor or the best company or the most whatever. If you want to put subjective information in, put it in a quote. It's really easy. A person can say whatever they want. You can quote somebody as saying anything. So if you want to if you want to put in hyperlatives, put it in a quote. And that is what a quote is good for. And it's, just also makes it more personal and makes it read like a story. What else can I say? I don't usually include long bios in releases. A lot of people do. A lot of people put every bio in. I usually link to bios or link to photos, make it easy. The key is to make it easy to read, easy to understand, and easy to access information. You want to do their job for them. They're inundated. Everybody gets dozens and dozens and dozens of press releases every day. Why are they going to read yours?
Wonderful. I love practical, like applicable tips for things like this, because I don't have a publicist. So any press releases that come out for Maroon Arts and Culture, I have to write them. And, it's not a skill set that just comes naturally, because I'm not a journalist. And so I don't know what the standards are and what the expectations are. I'm a good writer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm good at writing in the style that they expect when they receive a press release. So yeah,
that's really, really important to note, because there are people, like Lucy said earlier, that feel like they can and they should do it all. And a lot of that's based on budget, right? But I think if you, as the artist, understand the story and understand the importance of the story, that allows you the opportunity to tell the professional that you're working with how to give them an idea of how to frame it. And it shortens that amount of time that you'll need to go back and forth with them on certain things. And some of that will help your budget as well, because what it is that you're trying to do, what it is that you're trying to tell. So the more you can get that out, I think that's very helpful. The more organized you can be with that.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I think it's important to have a flow. It should read like a story. There needs to be a flow. When you read it back to yourself, one paragraph needs to lead into another.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many journalists I've had come back to me and said, well, I don't have time to do an interview, but I can run your release because it reads like a story. Or send me an exclusive quote and I'll add that, and that'll be our contribution. And then they run your release with, a different quote, but it's basically your story. But it's really important to be factual and to be detailed. And yeah.
Wonderful. Just a reminder to our participants, we're taking questions for our panelists. So if you have anything about marketing or public relations, don't forget to drop them in the chat so that we can ask them. I'm wanting to know about a press kit. What goes in a press kit? Who do you send a press kit to? And when is it time to send a press kit?
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, it depends what the press kit is for. Again, I work mostly in theater or music or dance, so it's mostly for performance. So a press kit is usually something that I give to a reviewer or a writer when they are either coming to review or writing a story about it. Usually the press release goes in there. Any features or interviews that I've already gotten that might shed light. What you want to do is shed light. So there could be background articles. Let's say it's a historical piece. I might put something interesting historical in there. Or I recently worked on a podcast series for Antia's theater company called the Zip Code Plays, where they did 6 short plays set in 6 different zip codes. So I researched each of the zip codes and I found historical information about landmarks and stuff in each of those and put those together for a press kit to sort of, give some background context to each of the plays. And a press kit can either be physical or digital. I find that people who come to the theater like to get a physical press kit. I don't know, it makes them feel important. They have something special. It identifies them as press. It's something they can lean on and make notes on. And then some people don't want it at all. They just want it digitally. So I have it both ways. What I don't include in a press kit are headshots and photos. Those are all links. I don't email photos either because they're huge. And again, they're attachments. Oh, here's a pet peeve of mine for actors. Here's a pet peeve. When I ask for headshots and bios, there's nothing more frustrating to me when I get an influx of emails and all of the attachments are 94325.jpg or bio doc, put your name on everything. Are you sending things? Are you sending your resumes to casting directors like that? Make sure your name is on everything that you send. It should be your name bio, your name headshot, your name resume. Don't send nameless files. People get dozens and dozens of them, and it's very frustrating. So I just want to, that's a little pet peeve.
No, that's one of those little nice little tips that people don't always think about, but that make a big difference.
Can you imagine how many headshots a casting director must get every day? And if they're not identified, they must end up in the trash. They open them, they don't even know who it's from. They don't even know what it is. So
I'm noticing a lot more people are doing, for individuals, are doing the electronic press kits, and they're doing their websites, and there are some places that sell electronic press kits and say that they're separate from the website. What I've done, or what I've recommended with people, is to just put all the information on their website. Do you have any thoughts on that? Any differences between the EPK and a website?
Well, I have my own, I said I don't do social, but I do have my own website, and I have every show listed on there with all the information. And I've worked really hard to train journalists to go to that website. So it's actually, I'm actually very proud of the fact that many of them do, and that they know if they're looking for a photo, they can go to my website and find it really easily. And I post the press kits there. I have a separate page for every show. And from there, folks can link to the press release, the press kit, photos, promo trailers, the company's website, everything. So everything is in one place. And yeah. And then I send out the direct links. If I'm sending out photos, I send out the direct link to the photo page.
Wonderful. I want to also, when sending out a press release for the first time, like as I mentioned, we're a small operation. I have no following. Do I just send a cold message out and just, hope that somebody cares? Or I know we talked about being targeted with our media, but do you just kind of put it out into the universe and hope somebody wants to look at it?
Well, you want to target your media, and you want to make sure your subject line is going to make them want to open the press release. So if you are sending something, let's say to the Santa Monica Mirror, make sure your subject line says something about Santa Monica in it.
I think one thing that I used to do is I would go, like when I was in Dallas and I was doing theater, I would go look at the theater reviewers and look who was specifically writing about what it is that I was doing. And I would reach out to them.
Definitely.
And for anything, look at the people who are writing about the things that you're doing, that are writing about the topics. So say, for example, you're doing a play about, I did a play about anti-apartheid in South Africa, right? That might be something that is a human interest story, human rights. I might look at those people in the LA Times and in those different publications that talk about that specifically and reach out to them. And you want to make sure that you do exactly what Lucy said. Give them a subject line that's going to really make them want to open and read what you're talking about, but also make their job easy. Make it like you're doing them a favor. Hey, I know that you write about this.
Exactly.
I wanted to let you know that I have this great story that we're doing. If I can help in any way, please let me know. I can get you more information, and you can also look at this link or something like that.
But journalists love it if you tell them that you know what they write about and that you've read them or listened to them or watched them or whatever, and that you're not just sending to them blind. So, and you also need to follow up with everything, because you have to assume, again, that everybody's getting so much email that they might not read it the first time, or it might just disappear into their inbox the first time. So you want to, wait a week and then follow up, and, but don't pester them, but persevere. You have to, I always say, people think I spend most of my time writing press releases and pitching, but I actually spend most of my time like going after people. And frequently I will get a, oh, thank you for reminding me, I just have so much on my plate kind of thing. So you have to stay on top of people. You can't just send it out once and hope it lands. And there's nothing like a personal pitch.
Right. Do you ever Haro?
I'm sorry?
Do you ever use Haro?
Yeah, I've used Haro a couple of times. Haro it's called Help a Reporter Out. And it's actually a service where journalists who are looking for stories, who are looking for people to comment on certain stories, will post what they're working on, and then you can respond. Most of that's great. Most of that stuff does not pertain to performing arts unless you're a celebrity, unless they're looking for celebrity interviews. I've gotten a few things out of that. But if you're writing about, if your business is lifestyle or health or education or, then that's a really good service. A lot of it is junk. I mean, people looking for threesomes, and I mean, there's all kinds of weird stuff on there, but I've seen a lot of weird stuff.
Stuff, but I think I focus on business ones because most of my clients are business clients. But I think that there are ways for you to, again, it goes back to the question that we were asked earlier. If I'm going to merge my brands and all of the slashies that I have, all the things that I do, what are other things that I do that I can then get publicity for my name? Because I'm just trying to get my name out there, right? And position myself as a subject matter expert. So I think that's a interesting way to kind of find some different things that you could do. I wouldn't research unless that's on brand for you to do threesomes and things that she mentioned she saw.
There's a lot of weird stuff, like Jerry Springer, like they're looking for sensational stories. Yeah. That's all I meant, not threesomes necessarily, but they're looking for people whose wives have cheated on them, or they just have a lot of strange requests. But some of them, especially if you're in the biotech or educational fields, there are a lot of interesting questions. And stuff. Yeah,
I got on it was dating, like your best date or something like that, and it was with Cosmopolitan magazine, and so that was kind of a cool thing. And so I think if you if that was something that I can then go back and use, because I'm, a young lady, and a lot of the stuff that I focus on, even in my writing, roles that I write for myself, kind of fall into that dating range. So that was an opportunity for me to take the press and then use that to market myself and use it as an additional piece of content.
Interesting. So we do have a question from Ebony. She wants to know if you would recommend Facebook for marketing or selling your work, or is there a better platform? I think that this is is there a better social media platform, or is there a better platform in general for marketing and selling your work?
LinkedIn.
I'm a big fan of having your own channels for certain things in terms of selling specifically. In terms of marketing, I think you look at the channels that make sense for you. So as an artist, right? Facebook makes sense because you can post videos on there. It's already a social area. You can be in groups. You can post things on your own channel. You can post things on your page, right? If I'm posting videos, then Instagram makes sense. Their Reels feature right now, they're really putting a lot of resources behind their Reels feature. What I'm hearing in my communities is that people who are on Reels right now, they're just getting a lot more reach, especially over these last few weeks, because Instagram is kind of directing some of their algorithm the way it seems. So, things that they would have posted before that they may have not gotten as much reach for, they can look back and see that same story posted now on Reels is getting more reach. TikTok, depending on what you do, might be a good place to promote it. The reason I say to have, and then obviously YouTube and things like that, if you're doing video, right? The reason I say to have your own hub, like your own website and things like that. I had an experience a couple weeks ago where I was completing some information for an audition, and I had a character that was similar the character that I was auditioning for, I'd played a similar character before, and I wanted to go on YouTube to find my YouTube clip to attach it to or to put it in the email and say, hey, please take a look at this, whatever. But YouTube was down, so I couldn't include it in that. If I had that on my website, and there are different ways to have videos hosted on your website, and I'm happy to write a tips and best practices sheet on some of that stuff too with resources. But that would have been something I could have easily linked to from my website. Luckily, Instagram was up, but Instagram has had trouble too, and in days with not showing up and stuff like that. So you always want to make sure that you have access to your stuff when you need to have access to it. And the best way you could do that is by using those other channels to amplify your brand, but having the hub of your brand be something that you own.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Just another reminder, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. In a minute, I want to ask you all about, career options for our participants who are passionate about theater, who love the arts, but are not actors like myself. But we did have another question from the chat about the historical show. I think it may have been Lucy actually that mentioned the PR for a show that deals with sensitive subjects and historic content. Was that Lucy? Are you the one that mentioned that show? Hold on, make sure. Yeah,
I didn't mention a specific show, but I mentioned I was talking about historical context, putting together press kits.
Yes, and clarification. So do you pitch to the choir, or do you try to reach a wider audience? What are some tips for attracting people who wouldn't normally look for that content?
Attracting people who normally wouldn't look for your content. I think you need to find an angle that would appeal to them. I mean, and then I think you really, again, it comes down to being creative. And if you want to reach somebody who doesn't normally write about acting or theater or whatever, then you need to figure out what they do write about and why they might be interested in what you're doing. I mean, I don't think there's a specific answer for that.
Yeah. We're talking about reaching an audience of consumers. I think it's important to remember that your audience is your audience, and not everybody is a part of that.
Yeah.
Game of Thrones is very specific. There are very specific people that watch that and that are interested in that. I don't fall into that category, but they did very well without me watching the show. So just remember that it's okay for not everybody to be a part of your audience.
Wonderful. We did have somebody wants to know if you all know of any additional resources or tools for early career folks working on branding, PR, and marketing. I don't know if this is in reference to early career artists who are wanting to brand and market themselves, or for early career people who are wanting to get into the marketing and PR field. But can you give us if you have any additional tools or resources for both or either, just let us know and we'll make sure we share them with our audiences. Do you all have any advice for some people like myself who are passionate about theater, but not actors, and are maybe thinking, you know what, I love amplifying the work of my friends. I love talking to other people about the work my friends are doing. Do you have any advice on how they can get into the field?
I think similar to what I mentioned before, like my friend who started her own show via Instagram, doing Instagram Live and meeting with folks and talking about the work that they were doing. That was something that she used a different channel and created something of her own. You can also do something like that using some of the different tools out there. Like there's StreamYard, for example. There's I'm launching a podcast, and I got this tool called Ecamm that helps you, I guess it helps you manage the audio, different things like that from a very technical standpoint. It's actually helpful to me because it separates the audio and you can edit it easier. So that's something, but just looking at what it is that looking for creative ways that you think will get the word out. Like I said, podcasts, like doing something on Instagram. You have the world is at your fingertips in a way that it's never been before. And right now, people are looking for content. They're at home bored. They're looking for something to do. And so now more than ever, there's an opportunity to get in front of new audiences, doing new things in ways that are really fun and exciting. I'm not sure for people who are on Clubhouse. It's a new-ish app that came out probably in April that people are now joining. But there was a girl who did an audition for Lion King on Clubhouse. Now, Clubhouse is all audio. You have your picture and people can hear your voice. There's no video, there's nothing else. So if you imagine people, not only did she have the auditions for that, but they were then going to do the production of it. And the way they were going to do it is that people would change their pictures. And so you would pull the screen down and the pictures would refresh. And then you would have the new pictures of whatever character you're playing and things like that. But that's something that's brand new that nobody had ever done, that was super fun and exciting and kind of goofy, but she had a blast with it. And the people who were involved had a blast with it. And now people know who she is just by the fact that she took a chance and did something different. So just always think about doing something fun and different and unique. If you have those moments where you're like, hey, it'd be kind of funny if somebody, those are usually the things that you should do that are different and fun and unique.
Going back to that creativity,
yes.
The magic word that we discussed. What about advice for people wanting to get in the field? Lucy, do you have any advice for people that want to become publicists for the performing arts?
Well, I have to say that now is not a good time to be a publicist for the performing arts. With everything shut down and media outlets shrinking, it's not a great profession to join, just like it's not a great time to become a journalist. But I would say just, do some homework, buy yourself an AP style book, read Grammar Girl, start reading the newspaper or online or in print or whatever, and look what news stories look like, and get to know the different journalists and yeah.
It's definitely do that primary research and figure out what's going on. And once the world stops being on fire and people can get back to our real lives, having that stuff that you've studied down pat so you can then jump into it.
Well, if anyone has any questions, now's the time to add them to the chat. I just want to take a moment and remind everyone that Lucy has provided on the Padlet a long list of resources that we can reference. There's sample press release for online and person events. There's the sample event alerts, event listings, interview guidelines. If you're about to go do an interview for the first time, which this is something I never even thought about, like making sure that your interviewer has certain information ahead of time to kind of steer the conversation, I'm assuming. So please make sure that you all go look at those resources. Very, very valuable information. Lucy, do you have anything that you need to add or to tell us about those resources before we get into it?
I'm happy if anybody wants to email me. You can email me directly at lucy@lucypr.com, and I'm happy to send you any documents or answer any questions you might have. Most of the stuff that I provided are real. They're real examples of releases that I've sent out and things that I've done. I think it is important, if you are scheduling any kind of interview, that you make sure that the person interviewing you has all the information, including how to pronounce your name, important things like that. Or if you are scheduling an interview for someone else, that they have all the information, a cheat sheet in front of them, so that they don't forget to mention your website or any other important information. I always spell everything out when I'm giving a website. So just so you know, for any kind of audio or any kind of radio or television or online interview, I always write, for example, lucypr.dot.com, so that people can look at it and easily read it. I don't just put the website, spell out that dot. Just make everything very clear and make sure that everybody has all the information that they need. There's nothing worse than having scheduling a television interview and the interviewer mispronounces the name of the company or whatever. It's very embarrassing. And you have, again, as a PR person, it's not a paid ad. So I have no control over what they say once they're in the studio. I can't run in there and correct their pronunciation. So it's a done deal. Or if the guest forgets to mention the website and there's no way for anybody to find you, it's done. It's over.
I think that, yeah, that's really great advice. We're coming to the end. We have a super exciting announcement about our final week. But before we get to that, is there any other final takeaways, Sequoia, or that anyone wants to, any final tips that you want to add on for marketing and PR for our early career artists representing themselves, or maybe even, like I said, wanting to represent their friends or get into the business? Any final takeaways?
I think as cliche as it is going to sound coming out of my mouth, just find ways to be creative, find different things you can do, make it fun. I mean, why do it if this isn't fun, especially as an artist? Look for new and exciting ways to share your art with the world. And I know that's easier said than done. But right now, the world truly is your oyster, and there's no reason that you can't come up with something new. So just do it. If you have questions or if there's something that I can answer, I'm on every social media network. And I'm at Sequoia Houston, no space, anything, just at SEQUOIAHOUSTON. Like, it's on my thing. So please feel free to reach out to me. DM is the best way. Well, slide in my DMs. I'm cool with that. Ask me questions. I'm happy to answer.
Wonderful. Any final thoughts, Lucy?
That's it.
Wonderful. Now, before I forget, I'm just going to remind everybody that if you want to stay up to date with Maroon Arts and Culture, you could text the word Maroon to 474747. I'm trying a new marketing thing because I get so many emails that I do not read. And so I didn't want to do our potential community that way. So I'm just trying out new things. So if you want to stay up to date with Maroon, send us a text and we'll keep you up to date. Next week, please join us for week 9, which we're going to be discussing self-care for the artist. Now that we're kind of gone through this whole process, we started with the artistic point of view. We've gone through budgeting, we've gone through marketing, we've gone through producing, and you're juggling 9 things all at once. We need to have a conversation on how to take care of yourself, how to have a work-life balance, how to advocate for yourself, how to set boundaries, how to breathe, positive mantras. So we're going to get into all of that. We're going to get into all of that next week for session 9. And then our final session is going to be looking back, moving forward. The idea behind that one was, as we go into what is an uncertain future for the theater, the best way for us to figure out the way forward, I think, may be to look back. And so we'll be talking to people who have been in the industry for quite some time, who can give us some advice on what it's like. Our guest for the final week will be Herbert Siguenza and my new friend on Twitter, Paula Vogel. So I'm super excited about that. You all please make sure that you tune in next week. And then the following week, we only have 2 sessions left. Thank you all so much for joining us. And I will see you all next Friday. Have a wonderful weekend.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.